I stood in my backyard at 6 in the morning, staring at what used to be my crystal-clear swimming pool. Instead of sparkling blue water, a mountain of soap bubbles stretched 15 feet into the air, spilling over the edges like a Sudsy avalanche. Thousands of dollars of damage. My dream pool turned into a nightmare by someone who was supposed to protect our neighborhood. The security camera footage was crystal clear. Karen Martinez, our HOA board member, dumping container after container of industrial dish soap into my pool at 2 in the morning. Her accomplices helping her destroy everything I had worked years to afford. She thought she could get away with it. She thought I would just take it lying down. She was dead wrong, because what Karen did not know was that I had been researching drainage laws for weeks, and what I was about to do to her perfectly manicured lawn was completely legal. That morning, as I watched those bubbles glisten in the sunrise, I realized Karen had just made the biggest mistake of her life. 3 years ago, I bought my dream house on Maple Street in Willowbrook Estates. After 20 years of apartment living and saving every penny, I finally had my own piece of paradise. The house was perfect, but what really sold me was the backyard. A gorgeous in-ground pool surrounded by mature oak trees and perfectly landscaped gardens. Every morning, I would step outside with my coffee and watch the sunrise reflect off the crystal-clear water. The pool maintenance became my meditation. Skimming leaves, testing chemical levels, brushing the walls until they sparkled. I took pride in keeping everything perfect. My neighbors would compliment me on how beautiful the backyard looked. Kids from the neighborhood would peer over the fence, asking if they could swim. Weekends were magical. Friends and family would come over for barbecues and pool parties. The sound of laughter echoing across the water, the smell of grilled burgers mixing with chlorine and sunscreen. My nephew learned to swim in that pool. My elderly mother would sit by the edge, soaking her feet and telling stories about her childhood summers. The Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association seemed reasonable when I moved in. They maintained the common areas, organized community events, and kept the neighborhood looking nice. The monthly fees were manageable, and the rules made sense. Keep your grass cut, no junk cars in driveways, holiday decorations down by January 15th. Basic stuff that any responsible homeowner would follow anyway. I got along well with most of my neighbors. Mrs. Chen next door would bring over vegetables from her garden. Bob across the street would help me with yard work when his back was not acting up. The Martinez family lived 3 houses down, and I rarely saw them except for the occasional wave when checking mail. Life was good. I had worked hard to afford this slice of suburban heaven, and I was going to enjoy every moment. The pool represented everything I had sacrificed for. All those years of eating ramen noodles and driving a beat-up car, saving every dollar for a down payment. Now I had my sanctuary, my reward for decades of responsible living. But paradise never lasts forever. There are always people who cannot stand seeing others happy. People who find joy in creating problems where none exist. People who believe that wielding a tiny bit of authority gives them the right to make everyone around them miserable. I should have known something was wrong when Karen Martinez got elected to the HOA board that fall. She had campaigned on a platform of stricter enforcement and maintaining property values. At the time, I thought she meant going after the real problem properties. The house with the broken-down cars, the yard that never got mowed, the fence that had been falling down for 2 years. I had no idea she meant me. Karen Martinez was 52 years old, recently divorced, and apparently had nothing better to do than make everyone else miserable. Within a month of joining the HOA board, she had appointed herself as the neighborhood enforcement officer. She carried a clipboard, a measuring tape, and an attitude that could freeze hell over. Every morning at exactly 8 o'clock, Corinne would begin her patrol. She walked the streets like a general inspecting troops, stopping at random houses to measure mailbox heights, examine fence lines, and take photographs of anything she deemed problematic. The sound of her high heels clicking on the sidewalk became the neighborhood alarm clock. My first encounter with Corinne came on a Tuesday morning in November. I was enjoying my coffee by the pool when I heard her voice from my front yard. She was talking to someone on her phone, loud enough for the entire street to hear. "The pool equipment is clearly visible from the street," she said. "That is a direct violation of Section 4.7 of the Community Guidelines. Unsightly mechanical equipment must be screened from public view." I walked around to the front of the house to find Corinne standing on the sidewalk, taking pictures of my pool pump and filter system. Equipment that had been in the exact same location for 3 years without a single complaint. "Excuse me," I said, "can I help you with something?" Corinne looked at me like I had interrupted a board meeting. "I am conducting a routine compliance inspection. Your pool equipment violates our community aesthetic standards." "That equipment has been there since before I bought the house," I replied. "The previous owners had it installed, and it passed inspection when I moved in." "Well, I am the new enforcement coordinator," Corinne said, making a note on her clipboard. "And I have higher standards than my predecessor. You have 30 days to install proper screening." She handed me a violation notice printed on official HOA letterhead. The fine was $50 if not corrected within 30 days, increasing to $100 per week thereafter, for pool equipment that nobody had ever complained about. Over the next few weeks, I heard similar stories from other neighbors. Corinne had cited Mrs. Chen for having the wrong color mulch in her flower beds. She measured Bob's grass with a ruler and fined him for letting it grow to 3.5 inches instead of the regulation 3 inches. The young couple at the end of the street got violated for hanging Christmas lights 2 days before Thanksgiving. But Corinne seemed to have a special interest in my property. She would walk by multiple times per day, always slowing down to peer into my backyard. She started timing her walks to coincide with my morning coffee ritual, making notes about my pool maintenance schedule. When I installed the required screening around my pool equipment, she found fault with the color of the screen. "The beige screening clashes with your house trim," she informed me during her next inspection. "Community guidelines require aesthetic harmony. You need to replace it with white screening." I began to realize that compliance was not the goal. Harassment was the goal. Corinne had decided that I was her target, and she was going to find problems with my property no matter what I did. Every time I fixed one alleged violation, she would discover 2 more. The other board members seemed either afraid of Corinne or simply did not care enough to rein her in. She had convinced them that strict enforcement would increase property values and maintain the character of the neighborhood. What she was really doing was turning our community into a police state where everyone lived in fear of the next citation. But Corinne had no idea what she was dealing with. I had not worked my way up from nothing by backing down from bullies, and I certainly was not going to let some power-hungry neighbor destroy my peace of mind over fabricated violations. The war was just beginning. After the pool equipment screening incident, Corinne kicked her harassment into overdrive. It was like she had tasted blood and could not stop herself from going in for the kill. Every week brought a new violation notice, each one more ridiculous than the last. First, it was the pool cover. According to Corinne, my standard blue pool cover was not aesthetically pleasing, and needed to be replaced with a neutral color that harmonized with the natural environment. I spent $400 on a new tan-colored cover, only to receive another citation claiming that tan was too dark for our community standards. Then she decided my poolside furniture violated some obscure regulation about temporary structures. The same patio chairs and umbrella that I had been using for 2 years suddenly became non-conforming outdoor installations that required HOA approval. I submitted the required paperwork with photographs and detailed specifications, only to have it rejected because the umbrella was the wrong shade of green. Corinne's obsession with my pool reached disturbing levels. She started showing up during my swim times, standing at the property line with her clipboard and camera. When I had friends over for weekend barbecues, she would position herself where she could see into my backyard, taking notes about noise levels and guest parking. "This is getting creepy," my friend Mike said during one of these surveillance sessions. "Why is that woman always watching you?" I had no good answer. Corinne's behavior had moved beyond normal HOA enforcement into something that felt personal and vindictive. She was not trying to improve the neighborhood. She was trying to drive me out of it. The breaking point came when Corinne recruited other board members to support her crusade. She convinced them that my pool area represented a pattern of noncompliance that threatened property values throughout the community. Suddenly, I was receiving official letters from the entire HOA board, threatening legal action if I did not bring my property into full compliance within 60 days. The list of required changes was insane. Replace all poolside furniture with approved models from a specific catalog. Install additional landscaping to screen the pool area from neighboring properties. Relocate the pool house because its current position created sight line violations. The estimated cost was over $15,000. I hired a lawyer to review the community guidelines and Corinne's interpretation of them. What he found was shocking. Most of the violations Corinne had cited were either completely fabricated or based on outdated regulations that had been superseded years ago. The pool equipment screening requirement existed, but my installation was perfectly compliant. The furniture restrictions applied only to commercial-grade installations, not residential patio sets. "This woman is making up rules as she goes along," my lawyer explained. "She has no legal authority to demand most of these changes. The HOA board could be held liable for harassment if this continues. But legal action would take months and cost thousands of dollars." Meanwhile, Corinne was escalating her campaign daily. She had started timing her property walks to coincide with my pool use, making it impossible to relax in my own backyard. She would stand at the fence line, openly starring and taking photographs like I was some kind of criminal. The final straw came on a beautiful Saturday morning in June. I was swimming laps before breakfast when I noticed Corinne in my peripheral vision. She was not just observing from the sidewalk this time. She was in my backyard, walking around the pool area with her measuring tape and camera. "What are you doing on my property?" I demanded, climbing out of the pool. "Conducting a detailed compliance inspection," Corinne replied without looking up from her clipboard. "The board has authorized a comprehensive property audit." "Get off my property right now, or I am calling the police." Corinne looked at me with pure contempt. "You cannot intimidate me. I have every right to inspect this property for violations. Maybe if you had been following the rules from the beginning, we would not be in this situation." That was the moment I realized Corinne was not going to stop. She was not interested in compliance or community standards. She was interested in power and control, and she had chosen me as her victim. No amount of cooperation or attempted compromise would satisfy her. She wanted a war, fine. She was about to get one. But Karen had made one crucial mistake in her escalation campaign. She had taught me that rules could be interpreted creatively, that community guidelines could be weaponized, and that legal technicalities could be used to justify almost anything. I was about to become a very good student. I woke up at 6 in the morning on June 15th to the sound of my neighbor's dog barking frantically. Something was wrong. The dog never barked that early unless there was a real problem. I stumbled out of bed, pulled on some clothes, and headed outside to check what was happening. The moment I stepped into my backyard, I knew my life had changed forever. Where my beautiful, crystal-clear swimming pool should have been, there was instead a mountain of soap bubbles stretching 15 feet into the air. The entire pool area looked like a foam party gone horribly wrong. Bubbles were spilling over the edges, covering my deck, my furniture, and flowing across the lawn like a sudsy river. My first thought was that there had been some kind of chemical accident. Maybe a delivery truck had crashed nearby, or there was a problem with the municipal water system. But as I got closer, the smell hit me. Dish soap. Industrial-strength dish soap. Someone had deliberately filled my pool with an enormous amount of cleaning solution. The damage was catastrophic. The pool water was completely unusable. The filtration system was clogged with soap residue. The pool liner was coated with a thick film that would require professional cleaning. Thousands of gallons of contaminated water would need to be drained and replaced. The cost would be astronomical. I called the police immediately. While waiting for them to arrive, I checked my security cameras. What I found made my blood boil with rage that I had never experienced before. The footage from 2 in the morning showed everything in perfect detail. Karen Martinez and 2 accomplices had entered my backyard under cover of darkness. They were dressed in black clothes like some kind of suburban ninja squad. Karen was clearly in charge, directing the operation while her helpers carried industrial-sized containers of dish soap. They worked methodically, dumping container after container into my pool while I slept innocently in my house. The footage showed Karen's face clearly in the infrared light. She was not trying to hide her identity. She was smiling, actually smiling as she destroyed thousands of dollars worth of my property. At one point, she looked directly at the camera and gave a little wave, like she wanted me to know exactly who was responsible. When the police arrived, I showed them the security footage. The officers were shocked by the brazen nature of the crime. This was not vandalism by random teenagers. This was a premeditated attack by a neighbor who was supposed to be protecting community standards. This is criminal mischief in the first degree, Officer Rodriguez explained. The property damage alone puts this into felony territory. We will arrest Ms. Martinez this morning. But when the police went to Karen's house, she was ready for them. She had obviously prepared her defense in advance. She claimed that I had filed false reports against her multiple times, that I was trying to frame her for property damage that I had caused myself for insurance purposes. She demanded to see the security footage and immediately claimed it was fake. That video has been doctored, Karen told the officers with complete confidence. Everyone knows you can fake anything with computers these days. This man is harassing me because I have been enforcing HOA regulations on his non-compliant property. The police were skeptical of Karen's claims, but they could not make an arrest based solely on security camera footage that could potentially be disputed in court. They filed a report and told me to contact my insurance company while they continued their investigation. I called my insurance agent, hoping for some relief from the financial disaster. What I learned made the situation even worse. My homeowner's policy covered accidental damage and natural disasters, but it specifically excluded intentional acts by neighbors or community members. Since this was clearly deliberate sabotage, I would have to pay for all repairs out of my own pocket. The pool cleaning company gave me an estimate that made me sick to my stomach. Draining and refilling the pool, cleaning the filtration system, replacing damaged equipment, and treating the chemical contamination would cost over $8,000, money I did not have readily available. But the financial damage was nothing compared to the emotional violation. Corinne had invaded my property in the middle of the night. She had destroyed something that represented years of hard work and sacrifice. She had turned my sanctuary into a disaster zone, and she was going to get away with it because our legal system moved too slowly to provide real justice. That afternoon, Corinne showed up at my front door with a violation notice. She claimed that the soap bubbles constituted unsightly debris that was negatively impacting property values. According to her interpretation of HOA guidelines, I had 24 hours to clean up the mess or face escalating fines. The audacity was breathtaking. She had sabotaged my pool and then had the nerve to cite me for the results of her own criminal behavior. She stood on my doorstep with that smug smile, acting like she had done nothing wrong while my backyard looked like a disaster zone. That was the moment I realized the legal system was not going to help me. The police investigation would take weeks. A civil lawsuit would take months or years. Meanwhile, Corinne would continue her campaign of harassment with complete impunity. I needed justice that worked on her timeline, not the court's timeline. I needed revenge that she would understand immediately and personally. And as I stood there looking at her smug face while soap bubbles drifted across my yard, I realized I knew exactly how to give it to her. That night I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, a cup of coffee, and a burning desire for justice. Corinne thought she had won. She thought she could destroy my property and face no consequences. She was about to learn that she had picked the wrong neighbor to mess with. I started researching municipal drainage laws, HOA regulations, and property rights. If Corinne could use technicalities and creative rule interpretation to harass me, then I could use the same tactics against her. After 3 hours of digging through city ordinances and state regulations, I found exactly what I was looking for. Section 12.4 of the Municipal Drainage Code allowed property owners to direct pool water drainage toward natural flow patterns during maintenance or emergency situations. The law was designed to prevent flooding during pool repairs, but the language was broad enough to cover my situation. Since Corinne's sabotage had created an emergency contamination situation, I was legally authorized to drain my pool using the most direct route available. The natural topography of our neighborhood sloped slightly downward from my property toward Corinne's house. If I drained my pool following the natural grade, the water would flow directly across Corinne's perfectly manicured lawn and into her prized flower garden. 8,000 gallons of soapy water would turn her pristine yard into a bubble-covered swamp. But timing was everything. Corinne had mentioned during one of her harassment visits that she was hosting a garden party the following Saturday. The entire HOA board would be there, along with half the neighborhood. If I drained the pool during her party, she would experience maximum humiliation in front of the very people who had enabled her behavior. I spent the next week preparing my revenge with military precision. First, I installed a temporary drainage system that would direct the pool water exactly where I wanted it to go. PVC pipes hidden in the landscaping, strategically placed to ensure maximum flow across Corinne's property. I tested the system with garden hoses to calculate flow rates and optimize the water distribution pattern. Next, I set up multiple security cameras to document everything from different angles. If Karen tried to claim I had damaged her property illegally, I would have video evidence proving that I had followed all applicable drainage regulations. I researched every relevant law and regulation, preparing legal justification for my actions. The research revealed another interesting fact. Karen's property sat in a natural depression that collected rainwater during storms. Her basement had flooded twice in the past 5 years, according to city records. The soapy pool water would likely find its way into her basement through the window wells, creating additional damage that would take weeks to repair. I also discovered that Karen had violated several regulations herself. Her garden shed was 6 inches too close to the property line. Her decorative fence exceeded the height limit in 2 sections. Her driveway had been resurfaced without proper permits. If she wanted to play the citation game, I was ready to cite her for everything I could find. The final piece of the puzzle was documentation. I prepared a detailed report explaining my legal authority to drain the pool, citing specific municipal codes and emergency protocols. I included photographs of the soap damage, copies of the police report, and evidence of Karen's harassment campaign. If anyone questioned my actions, I would have legal justification that was ironclad. Friday night, I did a final test of the drainage system. The water flow was perfect. It would cascade across Karen's lawn like a soapy waterfall, pooling in her flower beds and seeping into every corner of her pristine landscape. The basement flooding was an added bonus that I had not originally planned but was certainly not going to prevent. Saturday morning, I woke up early and prepared for the most satisfying day of my life. Karen's garden party was scheduled to start at 2 in the afternoon. The HOA board members would arrive first, followed by neighbors and other guests. I planned to begin draining the pool at exactly 2:30, when everyone would be gathered in Karen's backyard admiring her perfect garden. I put on my best clothes and made sure all the cameras were recording. This was going to be a performance that the neighborhood would remember for decades. Karen had taught me that community rules could be weaponized, that authority could be abused, and that harassment could be disguised as enforcement. Today, she was going to learn that every lesson has consequences, and some consequences come with 8,000 gallons of soapy water attached. As I walked outside to begin the drainage process, I could hear the sound of voices and laughter from Karen's backyard. Her party was in full swing. Perfect. The more witnesses, the better. It was time to give Karen the justice she deserved. At exactly 2:30 in the afternoon, I opened the drainage valve and began the most satisfying moment of my adult life. The first trickle of soapy water emerged from the hidden PVC system and began flowing across my yard toward Karen's property. Within minutes, the trickle became a stream, then a river, then a full-scale Sudsy tsunami heading directly for her perfect garden party. I positioned myself on my back deck with a cup of coffee, watching the show unfold like a director observing his masterpiece. The initial flow was almost gentle, creeping across the grass like morning dew. But as more water joined the flow, it gained momentum and purpose. The soap bubbles caught the afternoon sunlight, creating an almost magical effect as they rolled across the landscape. The first guests to notice the approaching water were the children playing near Karen's rose garden. Their excited shouts of "Look at all the bubbles" echoed across both yards, causing adults to turn and stare in confusion. The soap-laden water was moving faster now, creating a front of foam that stretched 20 feet wide as it advanced on Karen's pristine landscaping. Corinne emerged from her house carrying a tray of refreshments just as the soapy wave reached her prize-winning flower beds. The look on her face was everything I had hoped for and more. Pure shock, followed by rage, followed by complete panic as she realized what was happening to her perfect garden party. "What is that?" screamed one of the HOA board members, pointing at the advancing foam. "Where is all that water coming from?" Corinne dropped her tray, sending sandwiches and drinks flying across her patio. She ran toward the property line, shrieking like a banshee as the soapy water engulfed her carefully manicured lawn. Her guests scattered in all directions, trying to avoid the sudsy flood while maintaining some dignity in their party clothes. "This is sabotage," Corinne yelled, pointing directly at me. "He is flooding my property on purpose. Someone call the police." I waved cheerfully from my deck and called back, "Just draining my pool according to municipal drainage regulations. Sorry about the inconvenience." The water was flowing faster now, carrying with it the accumulated soap from 8,000 gallons of contaminated pool water. Corinne's lawn disappeared under a blanket of foam that looked like a winter snowstorm in June. Her flower garden became a bubble bath. Her decorative fountain overflowed with suds that reached 3 feet into the air. But the real disaster was yet to come. The topology of Corinne's property funneled the water toward her house, where the basement window wells created perfect collection points. I watched with growing satisfaction as soapy water poured through the windows into her finished basement. Her home theater, exercise equipment, and storage areas were about to get an unexpected bubble bath. The HOA board members were witnessing Corinne's complete meltdown in real time. Board President Janet Morrison stood frozen in shock as Corinne ran around her yard like a crazy person, screaming threats and accusations at anyone within earshot. The other board members huddled together, trying to process what they were seeing while avoiding the expanding foam disaster. "You cannot do this," Corinne shrieked at me across the fence. "This is illegal. This is harassment. I will sue you for everything you own." I held up a folder containing my legal research and called back. Municipal Code Section 12.4 allows emergency pool drainage following natural topography. I have full legal authority. The irony was perfect. Corinne had spent months harassing me with creative interpretations of community guidelines. Now she was experiencing her own medicine, delivered with legal precision and maximum public humiliation. Her guests were recording everything on their phones, creating a viral moment that would define her reputation for years to come. Corinne's pristine garden party had become a soap opera in the most literal sense. Her perfectly dressed guests were tiptoeing around puddles of foam, trying to reach their cars without ruining their shoes. The refreshment table was surrounded by bubbles. The decorative lights were dripping with soap residue. But Corinne was not finished embarrassing herself. As the water continued to flow, she completely lost control of her emotions. She began throwing garden tools at my fence, screaming obscenities that shocked her own guests. The dignified HOA board member facade cracked completely, revealing the unhinged bully that she really was. "Look what you have done to my basement," she yelled, pointing at her house where soap bubbles were now visible through the ground-level windows. "You will pay for every penny of damage." Board President Morrison finally found her voice. "Corinne, you need to calm down. We can work this out through proper channels." "Proper channels," Corinne screamed. "He just destroyed my property, he flooded my house, and you want me to go through proper channels?" The other board members were backing away from Corinne, clearly disturbed by her unhinged behavior. They had never seen her lose control like this before. The mask of reasonable authority had slipped completely, revealing the petty tyrant underneath. As the last of the pool water drained across Corinne's property, I gathered my legal documentation and prepared for the inevitable confrontation. The police would arrive soon. Corinne would demand my arrest. But I was ready with ironclad legal justification and video evidence of everything that had happened. Corinne had taught me that rules could be weaponized. Today, she learned that weapons can be turned around and used against their creators. The Sudsy flood covering her property was not just revenge. It was justice served at the perfect temperature. The aftermath of the Great Soap Flood was everything I had hoped for and more. Corinne's basement required professional water damage restoration that cost over $12,000. Her lawn and garden needed complete replacement. The soap residue had killed most of her plants and left her yard looking like a disaster zone for months. But the real damage was to Corinne's reputation and authority. The HOA board had witnessed her complete psychological breakdown in front of the entire neighborhood. Board President Morrison called an emergency meeting the following week and unanimously voted to remove Corinne from her enforcement position. Her reign of terror was officially over. The police investigation into the original pool sabotage gained new momentum after Corinne's public meltdown. Several neighbors came forward with their own stories of harassment and intimidation. The district attorney decided to pursue criminal charges, and Corinne eventually pleaded guilty to criminal mischief and paid restitution for my pool repairs. My pool restoration became a neighborhood celebration. The same people who had once feared Corinne's citations now volunteered to help with the cleanup and refilling process. Bob brought his pressure washer. Mrs. Chen provided lunch for all the volunteers. Even the young couple from the end of the street pitched in with manual labor. Corinne attempted a few more harassment campaigns, but her power was broken. When she tried to cite neighbors for minor violations, they simply ignored her. When she demanded HOA board meetings, nobody showed up. Her threats of legal action were met with laughter and reminders of her own criminal conviction. The new HOA board took a completely different approach to community management. They focused on actual problems rather than manufactured violations. Reasonable people making reasonable decisions for the good of the neighborhood. The atmosphere of fear and intimidation that Corinne had created was replaced with cooperation and mutual respect. My pool became the centerpiece of community gatherings. Summer barbecues, birthday parties, and holiday celebrations all centered around the backyard that Corinne had tried so hard to control. The irony was beautiful. Her harassment had turned my private retreat into the social hub of the entire neighborhood. Corinne eventually moved away, unable to tolerate living in a community where everyone knew the truth about her character. The house sat empty for months before finally selling to a young family with children who immediately became beloved neighbors. On quiet summer evenings, I float in my crystal-clear pool and remember the lessons learned during those dark months of harassment. Bullies only have the power that we give them. Authority without accountability becomes tyranny. And sometimes, the sweetest justice comes not from courts or lawyers, but from 8,000 gallons of soapy water delivered at exactly the right moment. The neighborhood is peaceful now. Children play in the streets without fear of citation. Neighbors help each other instead of reporting each other. Community guidelines are followed because they make sense, not because someone with a clipboard demands compliance. Corinne taught me that rules could be weaponized, but she also taught me that weapons work both ways. Sometimes the best defense against a bully is to become better at their own game than they are. And sometimes justice flows downhill like soapy water, finding its way to exactly where it needs to go.